Hey everybody, this video is called Bring Musicians, and today we continue our pass-through study here in the book of First Chronicles, looking at the 25th chapter, where we're going to be looking at the musicians for the temple. And so chapter 25, we're going to open up here with verse 1. And it says here, "Moreover, David and the captains of the army separated for service some of the sons of Asaph of Heman, and Jeduthun, who should prophesy with harps, stringed instruments, and cymbals. And the number of the skilled men performing their service was." And we see at verse 1 here, there's a break of a continued run-on verse with verse 2. But here we see the sweet psalmist of Israel, who is known as David. He's establishing music as the central feature in the worship of God at the temple. And David, he relied on his right-hand men, I call them, the mighty men, to help him. And as we saw back a few weeks ago, back in chapter 6, verse 31 through 48, you have Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, who were David's chief ministers of music. In verse 1, we see the word prophecy used. And many times, when we think of prophecy, we think of the foretelling of events. But I don't believe prophecy is speaking of revelation here. It is given a proclamation and exhortation through the lyrics of their music, because it says, "Who should prophesy with harps, string instruments, and cymbals?" It doesn't mean that they're playing music and then there's prophecy taking place. And so prophecy is not necessarily predicting the future or even speaking a direct revelation. Prophecy is also proclaiming truth, as seen coming up here in verse 5 to people. And music is like a vehicle for such proclamation and praise. You know, good worship music is going to be theologically rich. There should be, when we sing theologically worship, music, it should be music that points us to the doctrines of God. And so David and the leaders, they selected the most capable of leading the people to worship of God through their music. They were highly anointed. In verse 2 through 6, it says, "Of the sons of Asaph, Zachar, Joseph, Nathaniah, and Asherella, the sons of Asaph were under the direction of Asaph, who prophesied according to the order of the king. Of Jeduthun, the sons of Jeduthun, Gedaliah, Zeri, Jeshaiah, Shimei, Hashabiah, and Mattathiah sits under the direction of their father Jeduthun, who prophesied with a harp to give thanks and to praise the Lord. Of Heman, the sons of Heman, Bukiah, Mattaniah, Uzziah, Shebiel, Jeremoth, Hananiah, Hanani, Eliathah, Gidalte, Romanti Ezer, Joshbek Ashah, Malothi, Hother, and Mahazioth. These were the sons of Heman, the king's seer, and the words of God to exalt his horn, for God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. So Heman was a very blessed man with a full quiver of arrows. And verse 6, it says, "All these were under the direction of their father for the music in the house of the Lord, with cymbals, stringed instruments, and harps, for the service of the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the authority of the king." So 12 psalms in total are attributed to Asaph between Psalm and chapters 73 through 83. And Jeduthun's music ministry was so inspired that it was so inspired by the Spirit of God that it could be said that he prophesied with a harp. And so these talented men, they submitted to David's leadership. And the word seer that we saw here in verse 5, the word seer was a term for a prophet that was used, that he knew and he understood the will and the ways of God. In verse 7 and 8 says, so the number of them with their brethren who were instructed in the songs of the Lord, all who were skillful, was 288. And they cast lots for their duty, the small as well as the great, and the teacher with the student. So David did not give the choice worship assignments only to the most talented and greatest. Generally thinking, if we're going to appoint people for music, we're going to pick people that are most talented and greatest. We see that David lets God do the choosing, and it was both a prevention of pride for the great and teacher, and a learning opportunity for the small and the student. So lots were the method back then in determining God's will, as verse 8 tells us. And we're going to read a big chunk to finish up the chapter here in verse 31, because it's going to be more names that if you ever need help naming a child, you can go right through these Old Testament verses. So verse 9 through 31, it says, now the first lot for Asaph came out for Joseph, the second for Gedaliah, him with his brethren and sons, 12. The third for Zechar, his sons and his brethren, 12. The fourth for Zizri, his sons and his brethren, 12. The fifth for Nathaniah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The sixth for Bukiah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The seventh for Jeshuraiah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The eighth for Jeshiah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The ninth for Mattaniah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 10th for Shimei, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 11th for Azriel, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 12th for Hashabiah, his sons and the brethren, 12. The 13th for Shebaio, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 14th for Mattathiah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 15th for Jeremoth, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 16th for Hananiah, his sons and the brethren, 12. The 17th for Joshbekashah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 18th for Hananiah, his sons and his brethren, 12. The 19th for Malothi, his sons and the brethren, 12. The 20th for Elatha, his sons and the brethren, 12. The 21st for Hothur and his sons and his brethren, 12. The 22nd for Giddalti, his sons and the brethren, 12. The 23rd for Mazhathioth, his sons and the brethren, 12. And one more time here, in verse 31. The 24th for Romenti-Ezer, his sons and the brethren, 12. And for good measure, I want to read part of the last part of verse 31 again. His sons and his brethren, 12. That's probably going to be ringing your ears by now with all for the brethren 12 that I've had to go through with these verses. But we see that the musicians here are divided up in 24 divisions corresponding to that of the priests, as we saw back in our last video, of the 12 musicians each, for a total number of 288. And this would give leadership to the 4,000 instrumentalists. So, besides for the brethren 12, the wrap-up of today's video is the chronicler reviews the musicians separated for service. And the chronicler reminds us of the sons of Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman. And the chronicler, he showed the number of the skillful musicians. And he ends the chapter on the division of the musicians. So we'll see you next, as we're going to look at the chronicler give out on the gatekeepers for the temple. So we'll see you back next week for this, as we're moving into our wrap-up of this book. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. God bless.